Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the European Parliament here in Strasbourg. My name is Maria, and Parliament approved today the new rules about energy performance of buildings, which aim to make sure that new and existing buildings will generate less energy and will generate fewer greenhouse gas emissions. To talk about it, I am joined by Mr. Ciarán Cuffe, the member responsible of this legislation at the European Parliament. So welcome, Mr.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and of course, congrats for the positive vote today. But before we start, we are live on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook. So please, you can leave your comments and questions in the chat, and I'll try to put as many as possible to my guest in the next half an hour or so. So now we will go straight into it. First, Mr. Cuffe, can you tell us what the links are between buildings and climate change?
Good question. The links are really clear. We know that buildings consume a lot of energy. About 40% of the energy in Europe is consumed within buildings. And because of this, they also are responsible for a huge amount of our greenhouse gas emissions, about 36%. So over 1/3 of our greenhouse gas emissions in Europe are directly or indirectly coming from buildings. So if we can reduce the emissions from buildings, we're well on our way to tackling our climate goals. A lot of people don't know this. They think, agriculture, transport, but actually buildings and the construction of buildings uses a lot of energy and creates a lot of emissions. The good news about all of this is we can do something about it. We can insulate our homes, we can put PV panels, photovoltaic panels on the roofs. We can go for new technologies like heat pumps. If we do all of this, we save money and we save the planet.
So from what you are saying, the revision of this legislation will be key to reducing emissions. What are the most important elements?
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely key. And the long title of the law, it's the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. That's a bit of a mouthful. Particularly the technical name, it's the recast of the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. Forget about the name. This is about taking the buildings that we're in, that we live in, that we work in, and improving their energy performance. They consume massive amounts of gas, of oil, of electricity. And sometimes it's as easy as just insulation. You know the way estate agents talk about location, location, location. For buildings, insulation, insulation, insulation. But it's not just insulation. We also need new technologies. And if we do this, if we upgrade our buildings, if we have a renovation wave, it absolutely saves money. Of course, it's not cheap. It takes real money to do this. But an investment in renovation, it has a payback time. It will reduce the emissions, it'll reduce your bills. And this winter, so many Europeans saw sky-high energy bills. And we want to help people move away from that. There's money available from Europe. There's money available from various European Union instruments. And we think we can do this and make a real difference in improving the quality of people's lives.
Indeed, many Europeans are struggling this year with the cost of heating their homes. But could you elaborate more specifically, how do the new rules aim to support these affected people?
Well, the kernel or the essence of this new law is something called minimum energy performance standards. And this is about a letter between A and G indicating what energy consumption the building you're in has. A really high performance building is an A. A really poor performing building is a G. And we want to move buildings up through these scales. You know, these days, if you buy a washing machine or even a light bulb, it'll have this color-coded letter on the side of it. And obviously, if we can, we try and go for a C, a B, or an A. And it's exactly the same for buildings. A lot of countries around Europe already have this color-coded system. And in fact, for new buildings, a lot of countries insist that you get to a B or an A. But now we're saying, look, it's not just about the new buildings. We need to improve the standard there, but we also need to take all the other buildings. And you know, 80% of the buildings that are out there today will still be there in the year 2050. So it's really important, it's crucial that we tackle these buildings and gradually over time do these deep energy retrofits. You don't have to do it all today or tomorrow. You can do it in stages, but we're saying, look, let's start on a journey. The A rating, that's where we want to be by 2050. You can't do that overnight. It costs a lot of money, but let's get to an E by 2030. I mean, this isn't exactly a breathneck speed, it's movement. We want to get to an E by 2030, a D by 2033 for residential buildings, and gradually over time we nudge or move everything further up the scale. And to me, that's really important.
So step by step then. And what about all protected buildings? Are there special rules for the renovation?
Yeah. I mean, we have to have exemptions. If we said that every single building had to be upgraded, what would we do? Would we take the Colosseum? Clearly not. So heritage buildings, we don't have to do renovations. We say they're out of scope. They're not affected by the law. But actually, a lot of older buildings, you can do lots. You can put in secondary glazing. You can put insulation in the attic. You can even, in some cases, put in PV panels. They don't have to be right there visible from everywhere, but maybe you can put them in the roof where they're hidden. So there's a lot you can do with an older building. So we're saying that the heritage buildings are out of scope. And actually a lot of other buildings. Holiday homes, we're not telling you to put treble glazing into a holiday home that maybe you're in for 1 month a year. Small buildings are exempt, temporary buildings are exempt. So we're trying to be fair and we're trying to be flexible. And to me, this is the essence of the new law.
Okay, so there are few exemptions that are reasonable.
Yeah, and in fact, not only the exemptions that I've mentioned, but we're also saying to countries, look, you can make a list of maybe 20%, 22% of the buildings and say, look, we're not going to touch these for the moment. We might come back to it later on, but we don't want you to tackle everything. So that, again, gives that flexibility. So we don't have a rigid European rule for every building in every member state.
Right. Yeah, I was thinking because, of course, there are disparities among EU countries since there is also like different climate depending on the country. So, as a member responsible for this legislation, how do you tackle these disparities and these imbalances?
Well, we don't say one size suits all. And clearly, what you need to do to a building in northern Finland is very different from a building in Portugal. In Finland, you might already have double glazing and you might put in treble glazing. In Portugal, you might decide, look, the windows are fine. We'll just put photovoltaic panels on the roof so we can recharge our vehicle outside and save on the energy bills there. So we divide Europe into different climate zones: Nordic, Mediterranean, Oceanic, Central European. And you can even do that within a country. So for maybe Sweden or Italy, typically Alpine in the north, Mediterranean in the deep south, different standards for what you do there. And that's an important thing as well. And also, you have different types of buildings in different countries. In Central Europe, you have a lot of tower blocks, apartment buildings that are quite tall with district heating systems, whereas in Western Europe, in my own country of Ireland, you have a lot of one-off housing. So maybe you do wraparound insulation there, or maybe in Hungary, you upgrade the district heating scheme and get it to run on biomass instead of oil or coal. So every country will have a different approach. Also, and this is really important, we have this scale I talked about, the color-coded, the rainbow scale, from A being green to G being, I think, orange. But each country has a different G rating. And we're saying for each country, G will be the lowest 15%, the worst performing buildings in that country. And that's going to be really different in Denmark to Bulgaria. So really we're saying each country will play a part, but we don't want people to sort of do what's impossible. We want these countries to take the worst performing buildings and to improve them by 2030, but you're not going to have to do crazy stuff that you don't have the capacity, you don't have the workforce, or you don't have the skills in place.
So following with the climate, how can we adapt our buildings to extreme weather events such as heat waves or floods?
You know, it's a good point, and tragically, 2 years ago, hundreds of people lost their lives in floods with extreme weather in Belgium and Germany. But also heat waves can be devastating, particularly for older people. And actually, the solution for both extreme cold and extreme heat is often insulation, to wrap around the building and protect the people inside from the extremes of weather. And sometimes you can tackle a few different issues, both reducing the greenhouse gas emissions, but sometimes you want to do seismic improvements so that buildings are safer from earthquakes. You might also want to ensure that you protect people from flooding, or that you allow greater access for people with disabilities, wheelchair access. So sometimes you can do works that not only deliver for climate, but that also deliver for accessibility, for seismic protection, or for disabled access.
But how can we help, how can the European Union help those who lack the financial capacity to, for example, cool their houses, their homes in the summer?
Really good question. And thankfully, there's a lot of different funding available directly from European funding. The Recovery and Resilience funding, which is the after-COVID recovery money, lots of this can be used to upgrade buildings. I think Italy has 15 billion euro available, so that would provide a lot of insulation. Some countries can draw down more of this than others, but there's a lot of money from that fund. But you can also use structural funds, you can use the InvestEU money, you can use the European Social Fund. Even the Just Transition funds are available to not just upgrade buildings, but to retrain people. So let's say you were a coal miner, you want to retrain, and you can retrain to become a building retrofitter. So it'll create jobs, and that's what I love about this file. It's not just about climate, it's about comfort, it's about employment, it's about tackling lots of different issues. So those are the some of the direct funds. There's others that I just don't have in my head at the moment, but there's about 6 different funds. And then there's financial institutions in Europe. The European Investment Bank, the European Central Bank. Interestingly, the European Central Bank, they said, we want this file to go through. Not very often the ECB starts talking about laws that we're making here in Strasbourg in the European Parliament, but they did. They said, we want this file to go through. And then, of course, the European Investment Bank, they're rebranding to become the European Climate Bank, and a lot of their money is already going to building upgrades. In my own city of Dublin, hundreds of millions of euro are available to local authority housing, to social housing, to provide an upgrade. So there's money there. Yeah. We need more money, but I think once the law is passed, more money will flow.
Perfect. So you have just mentioned that the new rules will also create new jobs, but does the EU have the necessary technology and also skilled labor to carry out those renovations and modernization?
Yeah, we do. We have a lot of the skills, but we need more. And particularly with the COVID pandemic, there's been supply chain shortages. I mean, whoever thought one ship stuck in the middle of the Suez Canal would cause a logjam, creating huge problems around the world? But it did. And obviously, with lockdowns, the manufacturers of building products had to slow down. So there is actually have been supply chain shortages, but we're coming over them, we're overcoming them. So shipping costs have come down, and I think we'll see the costs of these building products come down as well. But then, of course, we've had war in Ukraine, so that's another added challenge in the whole discussion of what's available. Again, I think this is a temporary issue. I hope and pray it's a temporary issue. But I think particularly when this directive kicks in, and a lot of the stuff kicks in 2030, 2033, by then I think we'll be ramping up the production of building products, which is good. But you spoke about the skills issue. And actually, we do need to upskill our construction workers. And that includes the professionals, the architects, the surveyors, the engineers, but also the craftspeople, the installers. Because the man or woman who puts in a central heating system and they're used to gas boilers, they do have to retrain to do heat pumps. The certification can be different. But it's not rocket science. I mean, you can upgrade within a matter of weeks for these new technologies, for solar panels. So I think, yeah, we need to train the trainers, provide the skills, but I think we get over this relatively quickly and we move on into really providing good jobs, sustainable jobs, not just for the next 2 years or 3 years, but all the way to 2050. And I think that will reduce the boom and bust nature of construction cycles in Europe. Counter-cyclical is what we call it. So it dampens down the peaks and provides real jobs within the troughs. And I think over time, it's a real positive.
Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine has highlighted the importance of reducing dependence on energy imports. Will the new rules help the EU to become more energy independent?
Oh, it will. And I think not only is this good for climate, it improves our energy security in Europe. We often talk about energy efficiency as being the real low-hanging fruit in climate action, but in a sense it absolutely reduces our energy needs. We talk about negawatts rather than megawatts, so the negative energy. By that I mean the more we insulate our homes, the less energy we need coming from places like Russia. And it's not just Russia, it's the Middle East, where we're dealing with countries that aren't exactly paragons of democracy. So I think improving the European Union's energy independence is a really good thing, and that will accelerate as the years go by.
What would you answer to those who say that right now, due to interest rates rising, it's not a good time to make people carry out those building renovations?
I guess there's never a perfect time to do this. When the economy's booming, it's hard to find the workers. When the economy's in recession, we wonder where the money is. But I think actually, historically, interest rates are still relatively low. And the EIB, the European Investment Bank, it's lending money to governments at negative interest rates. So that's cheap money. And I think now is a good time to draw down this money. And you know, I think one of the lessons from the global financial crisis from 15 years ago was we shouldn't just be stuck in the headlights when there's a problem. And I think really the last few years have been about the perma-crisis. COVID, then Ukraine, then really high energy costs. I think we've got to just be calm and start putting in place the investment that's needed. And I think this will be one of the legs of the European economy going forward for the next 30 years. And to me, climate action, it's about possibilities and opportunities. And I see it across the board, in agriculture, in transport, in energy, in construction. We really have the possibility for creating good jobs for the future. And you know, it's not all perfect. There will be winners and losers. There are sunrise industries and there are sunset industries. And you know, people are concerned about ending the production of the internal combustion engine. But rest assured, there's going to be lots of jobs in improving our buildings over the next 20 or 30 years. So I think it will be a positive. And there's also possibilities for looking at the links between buildings and transport. Very simply, you build a home, you put solar panels on the roof. Those solar panels can provide the power for your vehicle, for your car or your e-bike or your scooter. So a lot of your mobility needs, the energy for that, can be met by your home. And to me, that's this virtuous circle, which can be a real benefit to everyone.
So indeed, all these sectors are interconnected somehow.
I think they are.
Parliament approved the recast of the legislation today, but what are the next steps?
Yeah. This is, I guess, the second last stage. We got agreement between the shadows, then agreement from the Energy Committee. Today, here in Strasbourg, we got agreement from the Parliament. It now goes on to what we call a trialogue. And this is when the different institutions in Europe talk to each other. So the European Commission, the Council of Ministers and the Parliament, we sit down in a trialogue, because there's 3 legs to it, and we hammer out a deal. And this is the famous, meetings that can go on till 6 o'clock in the morning. And really, the Parliament is ambitious, the Commission is relatively ambitious, the Council less so. So hammering out a deal is what we have to do. And I'm hoping we can do this over the next 3 months under the rotating presidency, under the Swedish presidency actually at the moment. So I will lead the discussion for the Parliament. I'll have the shadows, in other words, the representatives of the other political groups in the room helping me out in this. But ultimately, we want to strike a deal, and if we do, then the law, the directive, the proposal becomes law, and it's up to the member states to deliver. That doesn't happen overnight. They'll have to produce national building renovation plans, but slowly but surely over the years ahead, sometimes in a year, sometimes 5 years, sometimes 10 years, you'll see this investment flow, you'll see the improvement, you'll see people living and working in more comfortable buildings, and I think this has got to be good news for Europe.
And what do you see as the big, the big challenges when negotiating with the national governments?
I think some countries were not as ambitious as the Parliament. In fact, some countries said, this is a crazy file, we don't want to see it go through. Some countries weaponized the file. They said, this is Europe telling you what to do with your home. You'll be evicted if you don't do it. And nothing could be further from the truth. But it will be difficult to deal with the Council. 27 member states. It's like a teacher with a class. You're trying to say, shh, let's work together on this. You're saying to the unruly child, gotta behave yourself. I'm not saying that you can control everything, but we've got to bring everybody with us. And sometimes that means that the ambition goes down a bit. And that's the nature of how things work in the European Parliament. You go in with your head high saying, we want everything to be an A rating tomorrow. And then you crawl from the wreckage 6 months later and you say, well, we got some of what we wanted, we didn't get everything. And it's hard to know where things will go, but it may be that the ambition comes down a little bit from what we'd like to see here in the Parliament itself.
But you are still positive about the final outcome, right?
To be in politics, you have to be optimistic. And I always go in saying, it's going to be great. But I think it will be good. I think it really is a win-win. Okay. I'm positive.
So I'm going through some of the comments from our followers, and there are users who are saying that they want to make their buildings more climate friendly by using solar panels, but they are saying that this is quite expensive as well. So you talk about funding before, but will they be able to access any financial support to obtain this kind of renewable?
Yeah, some countries already have supports for installing solar panels. And in fact, there's under the Renewable Energy Directive, if you produce energy on your roof, if you produce electricity, you have a right to be paid if you feed it back into the grid. So some countries are good at doing that. Others, it's taking a bit of time. But there can be a payback. Sometimes it's as little as 7 years. In fact, when the energy prices spiked during the early part of this winter, the payback period was very short. But look, there won't be an immediate payback for everybody. Sometimes it will take a decade to get a payback from the technologies that you use. But in some instances, you can simply use the energy to feed into your vehicle, into your car. And I have a friend, and he's driving 15,000 kilometers a year from the energy he gets from the solar panels on his roof.
Wow. Okay. So also for our viewers who are watching us today, what can we do on our daily basis to cut energy consumption? Because this is actually what energy efficiency is all about.
Sometimes it seems a little bit daunting of, oh my gosh, I have to replace all my windows. But you don't. There's lots of little things that you can do. turning off radiators in a room that you're not using is a real simple step that we've done at home, and it saved us a lot of energy this winter. Putting in these valves on the radiators, most modern houses have them, but these thermostatic radiator valves, they essentially make sure that you don't put too much heat into a room that you're not using or raising the temperature too high. The TVR valves are great. They cost maybe 20, 30, 40 euro each, but they can pay for themselves in one heating season. Looking at the drafts in your house, so making sure that you don't leave windows open, putting in a little bit of weather stripping, we call it in English, around your doors that are letting air in and out. All of these changes can be measured in tens or maybe a few €100, and they can pay for themselves in a heating season. The bigger investments, the new windows, the new heating system, replacing a gas boiler with a heat pump, that can cost €10,000, but can also pay for itself over a number of years. I mean, what I say to people is a really significant upgrade for your home. It can be the price of a new car, but it can also save you a lot of money over a 10-year period. And even between the huge, big, deep retrofit and a little bit of checking out the drafts or turning down the radiators, insulation in your attic or in your apartment block, that can be a big saving as well. So everything from €10 to €10,000, there's a lot of things we can do in between. And I think that's something for households to think about. And one of the nice things I like about this directive is there's a lot of people living in energy poverty in Europe because they're tenants. They're not, they're unable to do the upgrade of their building, but it puts pressure on the landlord to do work, because the tenant pays the bills, and often the landlord says, I'm fine, I don't need to do anything. But this directive, it will put pressure on the landlord to do cost-optimal renovations, to do upgrades that will save money for the tenant, and that's really where we want to see action as well as everywhere else.
So indeed, it won't be like the tenants taking care of the renovations, but the landlords, right? Great. Okay, so Mr. Cuffe, my final question. You are an architect by profession. Have you noticed that change of mindset in the building industry during the past years?
I have, and I think, you know, every 10 years you get a wave of enthusiasm for green issues, and we saw that 10 years ago, and it faded away. But I think this time it's different. I think we've seen these crazy extreme weather events here in Europe. In my own city of Dublin, we saw the maximum temperature ever recorded last summer. We saw crazy weather in Brussels and around Europe even last summer. So I do think it's different. And I think construction professionals are seeing that there's a good business case for investing in this. 5 years ago, 10 years ago, my fellow architects said, oh yeah, energy, that's all very well, but I'm an artist, I create beautiful spaces. Now they're a little bit less reluctant to say that. They're saying, actually, we need to do something. And that, to me, is a really positive step. People know we have to invest in this. We have to make a change. And people are doing this. And I think people are benefiting. And it's not just about saving money in your pocket, but it's about saving the planet as well.
Okay. So thanks a lot for your time today. Best of luck with the negotiations with the EU countries. And thank you to all of you for tuning in. Don't forget to come back to our social media accounts if you want to find out more about what's going on at the European Parliament this week. So yeah, Mr. Cuffe, thanks again.
Thank you.
And have a lovely evening.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.